before this reading began, a bunch of us, I think about 16 of us, gathered at a Mexican restaurant over here on Atlantic Avenue, and I won't lie to you, some of those people were drinking something that was stronger than cherry cola, but not me. And I'll tell you why. I'll let a poem tell you why. It's the first poem that opens this book, The Biscuit Joint, and it's called Why I Don't Drink Before Poetry Readings. Because it's though even a single drop of alcohol awakens some area of your brain in which a thought will begin to take shape the way a mushroom appears on your lawn after a heavy rainstorm. 1 second and it's not there, another and it is. Though in this case, the thing that is growing in that new area of your brain is a phrase you've never heard before, never even thought of, yet now that you're just a heartbeat away from saying something that no one will understand, not even the you who is saying it, you know these new words are on the way to your mouth. That soon you will be saying something stupid and almost certainly offensive, because not only has the new area of your brain opened up and the words started to take shape in it, but you can tell there's also a kind of conduit forming, like a piece of plumber's pipe that leads through your forehead and behind your nose until it opens up somewhere in the back of your throat where, thanks to some neuromuscular or chemical process, or maybe one that has to do with the glands or the autonomic nervous system, that phrase which left that heretofore unknown phrase-making area of your brain at a point in time that now seems so distant to you, like the moment when the first man stood up on his legs in the Pleistocene era, or made the first ceramic pots in the Neolithic, that phrase has moved steadily, like a glacier leaving the ice banks of Greenland and bobbing along among the other smaller pieces of ice and white caps as it makes its way inexorably towards the shipyards of Nova Scotia, or perhaps more appropriately, it's chugging along like a little choo-choo train, leaving Manassas Junction, say, or Tchefuncte, and heading for a big city like Chattanooga or Richmond or Wilmington. Only now that phrase has changed, is now all but unholy, has turned into something so horrible that you'll be lucky if anyone who hears it ever speaks to you again. Though that is no more going to stop you from saying it than is the fact that the dean's wife is sitting in the back of the room with several members of her book club, wealthy women who are donors or at least potential donors to your university, your department, your creative writing program, this reading series, and there they are in the back. And several of them are beaming at you approvingly, certain that you are about to uplift and inspire them with your version of the best that has been said and thought in the entirety of Western culture. Just as your university's vice president for community affairs is beaming at you, though not from the back row, from the front, where she is sitting with her daughters, 2 adorable girls of approximately 8 and 6 years of age, and the 8-year-old is playing a video game, though her sister is looking around at the room, at the other people, at you, not quite certain why she is there or what to expect, whether you'll deliver a homily or produce a musical instrument and play it and sing, has no idea that you are about to look at the far corners of the room, the one to the left where the bar is, and then the other one where the unused folding chairs are stacked, and take a deep breath and let half of it out and look down at your pages and then up again and open your mouth and say, "Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction." By the way, I've signed some of these, Biscuit Joint and More Than This and some of these others. If you have your book with you tonight and you want to check it before I leave town tomorrow, I make sure that I wrote 2020 because, nobody writes a check anymore, which is where you used to put the date. So, I'm just not used to the habit. I'll be glad to correct it for you. Or, you can just cut out the middleman and correct it yourself. I don't think I really believe in karma or, kismet or any of those concepts, but I probably should because I'm from Tallahassee, which is, I thought, the only city in the world that contains the name of Allah. And I say I thought because I was at a party once and I saw Salman Rushdie, and I went up to him and said, "Mr. Rushdie, my name's David Kirby, and I'm from Tallahassee, and that's the only city in the world that contains the name of Allah." The satanic verses had just come out, and the fatwa had been leveled against him, so I'm pretty sure that Allah was on his mind. So I said, anyway, it's the only one that contains the name of Allah, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, David, there are many cities in the world in many languages, so perhaps that is not the case." Anyway, I said, "Well, thank you for clearing that up, but something's brought me here to end things and wind them up." And I want to read a poem to you. It's one that I often close with, but I'm going to read it tonight. And it's the one I close the house on Boulevard Street with, and it's called "Borges at the North Side Rotary." And what happens is that there's a Rotary Club in Tallahassee. It has me up every once in a while to read and talk about poetry, so the poem starts there, but you know how I do. It goes to Paris and then it comes back again. But anyway, it begins with an epigraph from Jorge Luis Borges. He says, "If in the following pages there is some successful verse or other, may the reader forgive me the audacity of having written it before him. After they go to the podium and turn in their happy bucks and recite the Pledge of Allegiance and the Four Truths, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? I get up to read my poetry, and when I'm finished, one Rotarian expresses understandable confusion at exactly what it is that I'm doing, wants to know what poetry is exactly. So I tell them that when most poets think of the word poetry, they think of lyric poetry and not narrative poetry, whereas what I'm doing is narrative poetry of the kind performed by, not that I am in any way comparing myself to them, Homer, Dante, and Milton. And he's liking this. He's smiling and nodding. And when I finish my little speech, he shouts, "Thank you, doctor. Thank you for educating us." And for the purposes of this poem, he will be known as the nice Rotarian. But now, while I was reading, there was this other Rotarian who kept talking all the time. He just jacked his jaw right through the poet's presentation of some of the finest vers libre available to today's listening audience, and he shall be known hereafter as the loud Rotarian. Nice Rotarian, loud Rotarian. It's like good cop, bad cop, or God the Father, Mary the Mother, buy low, sell high, win some, lose some, come see, come saw, half empty, half full, merchant copy, customer copy. But in a sense, the loud Rotarian was the honest one. He didn't like my poetry, and he said so. Not in so many words, but in the words he used to his table mates as he spoke of his golf game or theirs or the weather or the market or most likely some good deed that he was the spear chucker on the poobah, the mucky muck, the head honcho. For one thing I learned very quickly was that Rotarians are absolutely nuts over good deeds and send doctors to Africa and take handicapped kids on fishing trips and just generally either do all sorts of hands-on projects themselves or else raise a ton of money so they can get somebody else to do it for them, whereas virtually every poet I know, myself included, spends his time either trying to get a line right or else feeling sorry for himself and maybe writing a check once a year to the United Way if the United Way's lucky. The nice Rotarian was probably just agreeing with me, just swapping the geese and fish of his words with the bright mirrors and pretty beads of mine. For how queer it is to be understood by someone on the subject of anything, given that, as Norman O'Brien says, the meaning of things is not in the things in themselves, but between them, as it surely was that time those kids scared us so badly in Paris. Barbara and I had got on the wrong train, see? And when it stopped, it wasn't at the station 2 blocks from our apartment, but one 20 miles outside of the city. And we looked for someone to tell us how to get back. But the trains had pretty much stopped for the evening, and then out of the dark swaggered 4 tough teenagers. And as 3 of them circled us, the fourth stepped up and asked the universal icebreaker. Question: do you have a cigarette? Answer: non, je ne fume pas. Question: you're not French, are you? Answer: non, je suis américain. Question: from New York? Non, Florida. Question: Miami? Non, une petite ville qui s'appelle Tallahassee dans le nord de... And here the tough kid mimes a quarterback passing and says, ah, l'université avec la bonne équipe de football. He was a fan of FSU sports, of all things. So we talked football for a while, and then he told us where to go for the last train. Now, change one little thing in my life or theirs, and they or I could have been either the loud Rotarian or the nice one. And so I say to Rotarians everywhere, please forgive me, my brothers, for what I have done to you and to myself as well. For circumstances so influence us that it is more an accident than anything else that you are listening to me and not the other way around. And therefore, I beg your forgiveness, my friends, if I wrote this poem before you did. Not long back, Barbara and I were in Florence, and I saw a poster for a Jackson Browne concert, and so we went out to hear Jackson Browne, and he got up, and he was a shy, sort of slightly distracted guy, and he didn't look as though he knew what to do quite. And someone shouted, "Running on empty!" And Jackson Browne said, "Okay, there's only one rule, which is that when someone requests running on empty, I'll perform it," and he did. But so earlier this week, Sally Bloom-Stun stopped me and asked me to read A Man Like You But Older. And I said, well, there's only one rule, which is that if somebody reads A Man Like You But Older, I'm going to do it. So the heart of this poem is the birth of our son, Will Kirby. That was not easy. It turned out okay, but it was quite frightening at the start. But as with the Borges poem, this one starts elsewhere, and it gets around to that. Where it starts, by the way, is a pro tip. It's about how to find a good restaurant, I'll tell you that, and then we'll get around to the childbirth part. A Man Like You But Older. Here's how you find a really good restaurant. You go to the part of the town where you want to eat, and then you stand around till you see someone who looks like you, or a slightly better fed version of yourself, maybe someone just a little paunchier than you are and a year or two older, and certainly someone more affluent than you, but not much. Because after all, you're thinking ahead here. You're looking for the person you'll be in a couple of years, the one who really knows where to go and what to get, not the person you are now. For as much as you love yourself, it goes without saying that in the future, you expect to be someone you love even more, someone you absolutely worship, a person you'd spend every waking moment with if you weren't that person already. You certainly don't want to accost the person you'll be in 20 years. This one is liable to be stove up from excesses, or by the same token, puritanical and disapproving, a regular Savonarola, or maybe just someone with whom you no longer share, don't yet share enough common cultural references, and therefore someone with whom you can no more converse than I might with the self I was 27 years ago behind the shuttered windows of the Casa de Cura on the Via Pietro Tuar in Florence, where I stood just this afternoon, brushing back my graying hair and squinting to see inside the delivery room where my younger self wheels and holds his head in his hands and tries not to weep with rage and frustration. My son Will has just been born, and he isn't breathing. And the Italian doctor and the nurses have taken him into another room, and I'm afraid they're going to bring him back dead. And my wife is sleeping like a baby herself, though her blood is everywhere, and there's no one for me to talk to. And I'm afraid they're going to come in and hand me this dead child and say, "Mi dispiace tanto," and I'll say, "I'm sorry too." And then what will I say, or to whom? The man I finally ask about the restaurant is a dreamy sort, is licking an ice cream cone with an air of more than just a little self-satisfaction, and who answers my query with a restrained enthusiasm that I find charming now that I'm sitting with Barbara in the place he recommended and waiting for what promises to be some excellent roast fish, grilled vegetables, and cold wine to arrive. And I'm remembering how unhappy my younger self was, the self with darker hair and perfect eyesight, yet no real worldly experience of any kind. Yet I thought I was the oldest man in the world, though I was just 27 myself. And just then a nurse comes back with Will in her arms, and he looks like any other baby, like a bewildered mushroom. And she hands him to me, and I feel his breath on my cheek, and for a moment I'm frozen, still petrified by the horror of everything that had almost happened. And then something goes off inside my chest like a nova exploding, and I feel all this love for the infant Will Kirby, this bawling bunch of wrinkled protoplasm. But that was 27 years ago. And now Will is himself a doctor, an American one. He started breathing there in Florence, and he kept at it, and he came home in a little sling, and not a coffin, and he drank his milk, and he ate his mashed bananas, and he went to school and to med school, and is now himself bringing babies back to life, their fathers as crazy with fear as I that day. How I wish I had walked over and thrown back the shutters and looked out the window and seen my older self there on the sidewalk, smiling and waving. Yeah, after that Jackson Browne concert in Florence, everybody got on the number 14 bus to go back to the city. It was, it was a bus with maybe 80 seats, and there were 100 people, and every once in a while somebody was saying, "It's a girl, my Lord," and they flatbed forward, turning around to take a look at me. We'd all sing along, and so music brings people together, and so does poetry. In 2012, I think it was, I was in this same room, and I heard this same Laure-Anne Bosselaar say to a group very much like you, including many of you who are here tonight, saying the best thing about poetry is the friends that it brings you. And I think everybody can feel that this week. That was a remarkable, yeah, I'll do that too, yeah, right, yeah. That was, the festival is always remarkable. It was doubly remarkable that year because there was a woman named Naomi Jaffa who ran the Aldborough Poetry Festival on the eastern coast, way up the eastern coast of England, on the North Sea. You go out there at night, you'd look out, you'd expect to see, German U-boats. I mean, it's just a desolate, that is to say, a very poetic place. And she came up afterwards and she said, David and Barbara, I want you to come to Aldborough and read at our next festival. And I said, "Why us?" And she said, she thought English poetry was a little blah, a little flat. And she said, maybe you can jazz it up. And I'm not sure we did that, but we did our darndest. I do know there are a lot of English poems that end, "Then the dog died, and I wept," so so we can do better than that, but anyway, here's a poem about Tony Bennett. Have you ever seen Tony Bennett live? performing. You know, Tony Bennett's like jury duty. I mean, sooner or later you have to go through Tony Bennett. He's just always there. You know, you just can't avoid him. He's a marvelous performer. And I heard him sing this song called "Smile" that you probably know about, and so this is one of those braid things. It's that poem, Tony Bennett singing the song, and then there's a very moving video. You might have seen it on YouTube. If not, you can look it up after the show tonight. It's a video involving a woman named Francine Christoph, who tells about her experiences in the camps in Germany during World War II. And I try to get the two subject matters together. Tony Bennett sings "Smile for You." Tony Bennett is 90. And we love him because, like all successful entertainers, he conveys that sense of loving us as well. And he also loves his material. Indeed, before he begins his next number, he says, "I really love this song. Its composer lived in Switzerland, and when it became a hit, he wrote me a note." And you think, Switzerland? Because you can count the number of famous Swiss songwriters on the fingers of one hand, and not even that. What's Switzerland famous for? Sure, the cuckoo clock, as Joseph Cotton famously points out in The Third Man. Also cheese and neutrality. Of these, surely the most important is neutrality, especially when one's neighbors include the Germany where Hitler comes to power in 1933, which is also the year when a woman named Francine Christoph is born. 11 years later, she is deported to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp along with her mother. They survive somehow, and the adult Francine Christoph recalls that the deportees are allowed to bring a few personal items into the camp. So her mother packs away 2 small pieces of chocolate, knowing that her daughter will need them someday when she collapses from hunger. Though when a pregnant woman named Hélène goes into labor, the mother asks Francine Christoph if she can give the chocolate to Hélène instead, saying it may save her life. And Francine Christoph says, "Yes, mother, sure, I'm fine." And the mother gives Hélène the chocolate, and Hélène gives birth to a baby girl, and the baby girl survives, and 6 months later, the camp is liberated. The composer of the song Tony Bennett is about to sing is, of course, Switzerland's most famous non-Swiss citizen, Charlie Chaplin. "Dear Tony," he'd written, "thank you so much for resurrecting my song and making it famous all over again." And I couldn't believe the signature, says Tony Bennett. It was signed Mr. Charlie Chaplin, who used the tune as a theme for his 1936 movie, Modern Times. "Smile, what's the use of crying," sings Tony Bennett. "You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile." Francine Christoph grows up and marries and has her own children. One day her daughter asks her if she thought that the deportees would have been better off after turning her home in 1945 had they had access to psychologists or psychiatrists. And Francine Christoph replies, "Yeah, sure, but we didn't have them then." Now imagine that you're Francine Christoph. You're in your 80s now, and you can't stop thinking about the question your daughter asked. So you decide to have a conference to discuss these issues of trauma and resilience and survival, and you invite Holocaust survivors as well as therapists and mental health professionals of every kind. In Modern Times, Chaplin plays an assembly line worker driven mad by the monotony of his job, and for the rest of the film, he can't catch a break. He's in and out of the asylum, in and out of work, in and out of jail, and along the way, he meets an orphan played by Paulette Goddard and called simply the Gamine. And he keeps taking on new jobs so he can be her friend and protector. But every job ends with a dismissal and another jail term. And when orphanage officials show up to claim the Gamine, she moans, "What's the use of trying?" But Chaplin tells her to never say die, and the film's last image is of the two of them strolling down a California highway towards new adventures. At the conference, Francine Christoph recounts the horrors that she and her mother underwent. "I'm frightened, Mother," you say. "Last year I was 7 years old. This year I'm 8, and so many years separate these two ages. I have learned that I am Jewish, that I am a monster, and that I must hide myself." And then the experts begin to read their papers, and when one of the speakers approaches the podium, she begins by saying, "I live in Marseille, where I am a psychiatrist. But she says, before I deliver my talk, however, I have something for Francine Christoph. And she takes a piece of chocolate from her pocket and she hands it to you, and you think, what in the world? And the audience sees this coming, and they're in tears, but by now you're smiling at her, and she says, I'm the baby. And she smiles at you, and you smile. Okay, I'm going to read you the title poem from More Than This, but first of all, let me tell you about the title of the book, because people come up and they kind of give you that head tilt, the way the dog looks at you when you step out of the shower, and they say, what does that mean? What does More Than This mean? And it's real simple, and I tell them, well, we have this, so let's have more than this. Okay, so do it with me, will you? We have this, make the this gesture. And now let's have more than this. All right, terrific, good for you. Give yourself a hand. You passed that one with flying colors, yeah. So this is a three-part braid, not a two-part braid like the last story. There are three stories here. There's one that begins and ends the poem. There's a short one early in. There's a long story about a cowboy and a horse and a dog in the middle. The story, a kid, the shortest part is a World War I story that a student of mine told me about. The long dog and cowboy and horse story is a story my barber told me, Howard, my barber. And but then there's a story that begins and ends the poem, which is about a woman trying to mourn and grieve in a graveyard, and somebody's making too much noise and just irritating the devil out of her. And for the life of me, I couldn't remember where I got that, but that didn't stop me from writing the poem, of course. And then it came out in American Poetry Review, and it was in a book that was called More Than This, that was in the process of being edited and published. And I sat up like Lawrence Harvey and the Manchurian Candidate at 3 a.m., like sweating and shaking. I don't remember where it came from. And so I went in, did, and checked on the computer. Sure enough, it was one of those modern love stories from the Sunday New York Times. And it was written by a woman named Jessica Strasser. And so I wrote her and I said, Jessica, I got to throw myself on your mercy. I read this poem and the story, it really got into my skin. I forgot my source. I use it in the poem, and I don't quite know what to do about that. And she wrote back the sweetest letter I've ever gotten, and she said, David, this is what we do for each other. We read each other, and we contribute to the general conversation. She said, just let me know when your book comes out so I can buy a copy. And I said, don't worry about buying a copy. It's coming your way. But Jessica Strauss is a wonderful novelist and a friend to this day, and a generous soul. And so you should read her work as well. So poem goes this way. When you tell me that a woman is visiting the grave of her college friend, and she's trying not to get irritated at the man in the red truck who keeps walking back and forth and dropping tools as he listens to a pro football game on the truck radio, which is much too loud, I start to feel as though I know where this story is going. So I say, stop. You're going to make me cry. How sad the world is. When young men died in the mud of Flanders, the headmaster called their brothers out of the classroom one by one. But when the older brothers began to die by the hundreds every day, they simply handed the child a note as he did his lessons. And of course the boy wouldn't cry in front of the others, though at night the halls were filled with the sound of schoolboys sobbing for the dead, young men only slightly older than themselves. Yet the world's beauty breaks our heart as well. The old cowboy is riding along, and he looks down at his dog, and he realizes she died a long time ago, and his horse did as well, and this makes him wonder if he's dead too. And as he's thinking this, he comes to a big shiny gate that opens onto a golden highway, and there's a man in a robe and white wings, and when the cowboy asks what place this is, the man tells him it's heaven and invites him in, though he says animals aren't allowed. So the cowboy keeps going till he comes to an old rusty gate with a road full of weeds and potholes on the one side and the guy on a tractor. And the guy wipes his brow and says, "You three must be thirsty. Come in and get a drink." The cowboy says, "Okay." He says, "But what place is this?" And the guy says, "Oh, this is heaven." And the cowboy says, "Well, what's that place down the road with the shiny gate and the golden highway?" And the guy says, "Oh, that's hell." And the cowboy says, "Well, doesn't it make you mad that they're pretending to be you?" And the guy on the tractor says, "No, we like it that they screen out the folks who would desert their friends." "You tell me your friend can't take it anymore." And she turns to confront the man who's making all the noise, to beg him to leave her alone with her grief. And that's when she sees that he's been putting up a Christmas tree on his son's grave, and that he's grieving too, but in his own way. One that's not better or worse than the woman's, just different. The kind of grief that says, "This world is so beautiful, it will give you no peace." Remember, I'm supposed to be the funny guy, right? So, yeah. I'm going to close with a poem called Armstrong's Good Night. There is a song that you've heard called The Parting Glass. You know that song? It's just the prettiest song in the world. Tonight when you're on your computer, after you look up the Francine Christoph story, look up The Parting Glass, and they're four guys who walk into a bar one by one in Ireland, and they begin to sing. And I mean, just these guys, just I'm a happily married man, but I would go for any one of them in a second. In fact, I had a student this last term, and she's a musician, and she and I trade tips. And her name is Sarah Morrison, and I sent her that one, and I said, "Pretty song, huh?" She said, "Yeah." And I said, "And how about those singers?" I said, "Do any of them qualify as the future Mr. Sarah Morrison?" And she said, "Would all of them be an appropriate answer?" So anyway, it's a great little video, and but that song is based on a song written by a man named Johnny Armstrong back 500 years ago, who was scheduled to die. Armstrong's Good Night. "Good night and joy be with you all," writes Johnny Armstrong in his prison cell as he awaits the dawn of the day he'll hang. It's the winter of 1600, and border raider Johnny is about to marry the rope maker's daughter for his part in the murder of Sir John Carmichael. The poem he writes as he awaits his executioner becomes a song first called Armstrong's Good Night, and now The Parting Glass, versions of which are sung at funerals and retirement parties the world over, and also when friends move away to a better job, better lover, better life. Armstrong's song is sad but beautiful, or perhaps I should say sad and beautiful, for the deepest beauty finds itself in the heart of night. Now imagine Johnny Armstrong in his last hours when, like a shaft clear and cold, the thought pierces him that in the end, all this is only a small and passing thing, that there's a radiance beyond the shadow's reach. And so he writes, "But since it fell unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I gently rise and gently call, good night and joy be with you all." Johnny Armstrong was hanged as a murderer, but that's what the English court called him. To his people, he was a patriot, though in his poem, he admits to nothing more than carelessness. "Of all the money that e'er I had, I spent it in good company, and all the harm I've ever done, alas, it was to none but me." As far as jobs go, I'd say I fall somewhere between murderer and patriot, for I've killed no one yet. And I love my country, or at least my version of it. As far as being careless, well, they don't hang you for that. So let us say good night to each other while we can. Good night to my darling wife and to the sweethearts who came before her. And may you think as well of me as I do of you. Good night to my boys and their wives and children and children's children, the ones I'll never see. Good night to the soldier, the teacher, the chef, the engineer, and banker. Good night to the prisoner in his cell and to those who will come for him in the morning. Oh, and good night to my parents who were the first to bid me good day. Good night, friend, and good night to you who were my friend, but are no longer for reasons neither of us remembers. Good night, and joy be with you all. Yeah.